Thank you to the finance folks for allowing us to use their room. One thing of note, there is no heat coming out of the registers. Pipe is broken, and we doubt there will be much heat in this building today. As we've experienced in the last several days, we have an old system, and it's needing of a total overhaul, according to Doug downstairs. So with that, I'd like to get into and utilize our time before our hands freeze up on us here. There's been, there was also another sheet that I wanted to pass out to. Well, I don't know where that is. We'll get it later. Sheets which have been passed out, you should have. There's a sheet that is the old formula which we used in 2008, 2017 with some updated information on it. There is a sheet which deals, on the top it says, from Jennifer Ford to myself. It has information regarding teacher minimum salary, teacher average salary, and principal salary by school. And lastly, there was a sheet which I got, I asked Rebecca Fredette put together. She's the director of special education services over at DOE. So it's a sheet with a little table on the top, which reflects, the weighted value of special education in accordance with the bill which we had last year. And I had another sheet, and I don't know where I put it or where it is, but if not, we can get a copy made again. This sheet is the requirement of the federal government, DOE, and this is from the Bureau of Education that we have. It talks about the categories that school districts have to respond to in terms of special education services for their reporting to the federal government. This is IDEA Indicator 5, Education Environment, School Age, and people in policy have seen this before, but yeah, we need to make some copies of that if we could, please. Unless I left it somewhere. Yeah.
Thanks. Just a quick question on the spreadsheet that Ms. Fredette prepared. It's got the child count. It's got the proposed funding, which was from the bill we looked at last year, right?
Yes.
No, I just
Well,
those.
It's based on 1022 count. In other words,
I'm talking about the proposed funding per pupil. Were those the differentiated factors?
some of those values have changed slightly here in accordance with another sheet which we have. So we'll get in there, talk about
Oh,
this.
okay.
It's on all these are on the docket for discussion today.
Fine. Great, thank you.
What we got to do is that we have these four bills in front of us. One deals strictly with SWEP. The other one is the foundation bill that you have. And then we have the two bills dealing with base costs and the special education cost. And so we really need to get into a discussion as a group right here about those bills and deal with them, Although two of them are wrapped into the foundation formula, the SWEP is an issue unto itself, I believe. But so what I'd like to do today, when we get back, when Tracy gets back with that sheet he's copying, I'd like to first get into the bill, which is dealing with the $27,000 for special education. That one, I think it's the last one that was on the doc. Let's see. Yes, it's the last one. It's 1656 on today's agenda here. Very much. Okay, good. Those would go around. Okay. So the first bill, which we're going to deal with, is the one that's on there last, it's 1656. That's increasing the adequacy grant for pupils receiving special education services. And I think we all are familiar with that. It's simply raising the additional area within the differentiated aid, which we are presently at $2,100 to $27,000 per pupil. So what I provided is that there's a number of sheets which I provided, but there's one dealing with Rebecca Fredette, which is the director, and this sheet dealing with Individuals with Disabilities Education Act IDEA Part B, Indicator 5. When we're looking at addressing the students in these categorical areas, just as a brief rundown, we have the 13 IEPs, and we know that delivering these services some of those IEPs are much more expensive than another one where students receiving a shorter period of time. The form that you see from the data fact sheet, which is what we report in Indicator 5A, B, and C, is in accordance with a requirement that the department has to collect this information so we can break down the IEPs by service time, the amount of time which they're engaged in receiving direct services from special education or indirect services as well. And what Rebecca's done is she's broken it down into A, B, and there's two categories within B which come together. The first one, A, is inside regular class 80% or more of the school day. That's for kindergarten through age 21. So they're in the classroom, the regular classroom, for 80% of the time. The other 20%, they may be outside the classroom for support. In category B, it's inside regular class less than 40% of the day, and inside regular class 40% through 79% of the day. So those two are put together. And so those would be students which are receiving a regular class less than 40% inside regular class for the first one is when they're getting only 20%. This would be for everything less than that. And the third category, C, is for those that are in hospital bound, residential facility, separate school, correctional facility. We're talking about special education aid and CAT aid. So what is being, I asked Rebecca to give us this information based upon a weighted factor. Now, this was in the commission study as well, and the weighted factor within the commission study was $27,000 per kid. So $27,000 went to every student who has an IEP, regardless whether they're receiving a half-hour instruction 2 times a week or they're receiving 5 hours per day per week which is much more costly. And some IEPs we know require certain services that are contracted services and very expensive, and equipment as well, and specialized facilities within the building, even modifying things. So what I'm presenting is I'd like to put this out for discussion here, is that I do not know, based upon that, and this is one of the reasons why the vote on the commission study was 16-1, and I was the one. I did not support the idea of funding the same amount of money of 27 grand for every student. And I'll talk a little about the foundation. You can speak to that too, but that's based off of, and of course I'm an input-oriented person. I want to know what those elements are that are contributing to base adequacy. That formula looked at the opposite end, and no matter how you move things around internally, you had to come up with that particular pupil cost at the end, or support that pupil cost. So if you had a weighted version in the formula, which is 4.29 times the base, and you change that to up or down, something else is going to have to change as well within to get to that final product. Cost factor. So I prefer myself to see us support differentiated aid in accordance with the criteria that we have for the categories. And the criteria that we have, we tried IEPs before, breaking the 13 IEPs down into separate categories, but kids cross over from one to the other. You have multiple handicaps, and that's not the way to do it. And after contacting the department, they have this information in accordance with what the federal requires. So I'm advocating that the formula that we propose be one, if we're going to make any changes to the formula at all, be reflective of a weighted formula. Now, just one other bit of information for you before we charge off into the discussion. There is a sheet which we got from the Education Commission of the States. I had Jennifer for research the number of states which have a weighted formula. You can see it right up top. It says the filter for this on the first page was special education funding mechanism, multiple weights. So they're filtering it out to multiple weights. And you can see through there that there's a number of states which do have this built into their adequacy formula. So we're going down a path that we would be going down a path that is well accepted throughout the country. And there's others. I have another sheet, which I'm not going to put that out in front of you right now, where there's hybrids to this formula. Everybody is doing something a little bit differently in how to address this. So what I'd like to do is open this up to our discussion right now and find out where people are in terms of this bill and how it may impact our costing of an education. So it's open for discussion. 1656. Any feedback? Yes, Representative Cascadden. She had her hand up too. Ladies first.
Sorry, didn't see that. Sorry.
No, that's all right. Maybe it's the same question. I don't know. So 4.29 was what we came up in the formula as the weighted amount times the base comes out to 27,000. So based on what you're saying, are you suggesting that that weight be different for an A, a B, or C category, depending on how much that service is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I am.
And the 4.29 is what? Is it a C? Is it a B? Is it an A?
4.29
I don't remember.
is a weight that's been given to all those categories within that formula you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm suggesting that, and I'm not necessarily saying I'm not supporting 4.29. I think that's too high. So the question I'm asking right now, should we develop categories for costing them out? And should that be reflective of the cost of the base cost, which is a result of inputs
Yep.
for what we see as an adequate education?
So just, it seems then it would make sense for 4.29 to be a highest or most expensive services, right? Is that the homebound or the out of district or the one that
Yes,
requires a
and-
higher level?
And
No?
it doesn't,
Okay,
it
then
doesn't
I'm gonna let
necessarily
him
pay for
talk.
all the
I'll let Dave
catastrophic
talk.
aid either. It's just
Okay.
what we're providing for that student. And the amount, I believe that comes out to not 4.29. If you look at the highest category there, it's 1.29 of the base.
Where are you looking?
That's the calculation I have here.
Oh,
So
yeah,
you-
okay.
And in the other, where we now are funding education around what, $2,300 roughly? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
For per pupil.
Mhm.
And that is a percentage of the base right now. So the percentage you're seeing there is going to be roughly around 0.43 of the base. And the other category in the middle would be about 0.97, and this would be about 1.29 for the catastrophic. And the total cost for that, for the state, the difference between what funding right now differentiated would be a little over $12 million. That's on the sheet that you have there. Representative Luno, you have a question?
Yeah, so the 4.29 weight that we have in House Bill 1586 was calculated based on actual costs that districts have that are attributable to special education. So it's not a made-up number, it's not a what can we afford or anything like that. It's what districts are currently spending that is attributable to special education costs. And it includes all the three categories that you're talking about. I agree, it's a blended number, all special education costs. And I absolutely agree with you that I think if we can get data from the Department of Ed that we were not able to get during the commission's work, that breaks down costs by category, actual district costs attributable to special education by category, then we can provide some better definition to those differentiated aid factors. So I absolutely agree with you on that. So what I'm asking is, and this isn't on the sheet, I believe, is what do we know to be the district costs attributable to special education for each of these categories? Not just a proposed funding per pupil, because 1586 again separates costing from funding. And so starting with cost, what has the department been able to provide for district costs of special education attributable to each of those categories?
Okay, are there other, you know, I'm looking at, I'm looking at the formula we have in place right now. And when you look at that formula, that's how differentiated aid was developed, off of the base, the inputs, and what the cost of a teacher is, what the cost, you know, overall for all those categories, which you see on the other sheet that I passed out to you, this one.
Yeah?
And on that sheet right there, notice that the amount of money which I put on that sheet is, for base, was $42,560. That is a formula which's been derived based upon first-year teachers that are currently on the books right now. That's the average. Versus the original cost, which was $3,456, I believe.
But that was calculated much the same way as this. Just
This is using the exact
Yeah.
same formula,
Yeah.
only plugging in.
Yeah.
And you can see, if you look at the bottom line on the back page, as you follow that, notice also on this sheet right here, the teacher, K through 2 teacher has been reduced from 25-1 to 20-1. And the 3 through 12 is reduced from 30-1 to 1 to 25. But the bottom line is, it's $4,852 as the universal cost of base cost.
Okay.
So that's the figure we're working off of to get to special education.
Right, but how do we get to knowing what multiple or what weight off that 4852 would be if we don't know what the districts are actually, what the district costs are for each of those categories? You know, the department has been able to give you the student count for each one. They probably have the costs for for those categories of special education, specific special costs attributable to those categories of special education. And I mean, doesn't that make sense to have what are the costs, and then we can come up with the weights?
There is a bill that's in the House right now working towards forming a commission to dig into just what you're saying, and that you're the prime sponsor of that, Representative Heath. We get that on Thursday. And we're talking about a topic here, which is, yes, you know, the federal commitments, they're not doing what they said they'd initially do. It's what, 40% they said they're cutting that down to 19%,
Yeah, slow.
roughly. And so we're not receiving, so what the districts are going to are having to do through their property taxes, they're having to make that difference up.
Oh, believe me, I know that. I mean,
We all know that.
So,
And so the costing of special education, that's taken a huge chunk of our operating monies for education.
So I guess
total.
what I'm asking, Mr. Chair, is can we request the department to provide the special education costs attributable to each of the three categories statewide, you know, that districts are spending now. And wouldn't that help, not only this subcommittee, but also any future study committee on this?
Representative Heath?
Can I add to that request that the department define the manner in which they'll collect that data? I think it's important that we start thinking now about a mechanism, because I think this is going to be a have to do at some point. A mechanism, we know that, I don't know if they call it I4C anymore, whatever they call it, the student count.
Yeah.
Is that going to be the methodology? And through that process,
Okay.
will that give us that really accurate information that we're looking for? So I just would like to kind of know, how do they think they
Okay.
obtain that knowledge?
I think to see the actual cost, the actual
Yes.
is a very worthy task.
Yeah.
Okay.
And necessary.
And necessary as a subcommittee, though, we only have a week and a half, 2 weeks to
Okay.
get this thing
Yeah.
done. So I think what we need to do is that if we're all in agreement that working towards a differentiated component, which is based on categorical needs of these categories, and the only way I know of doing it is in conjunction with this requirement right here, rather than trying to find out by IEP. I don't think they have that information now. They have this information. So what is the actual cost for these students?
To get that from the DOE.
I don't know if they collect that. So it's got to be somewhere, I know, but that's contributing to the increase in our cost for education totally. So when it comes to this particular bill, how's this committee feeling about weighting it all at $27,000? That's what we're gonna have to make a decision, up or down on that, or interim study it, or where are we going? I'm asking the question to the committee.
Yep, Mr. Chair, the $27,000 seems to be a number that is attributable to special education blended across all categories.
My question is, how'd you come up with 4.29?
4.29 was
The whole total.
4.29 was done through the AIR report, and they looked at 10 years worth of DOE 25 data. We're able to pull out the costs that are specific to special education, divided that up by the number of students, and came to a weighting factor of 4.29 off the base of $6,500.
But it's also related to your
on that.
end cost for a pure pupil cost in education.
Right, but it came out to, the 4.29 is roughly $28,000.
So if
it's-
another component within this costing formula were to change and go up, would this have to come down?
So you've got three categories that you're proposing. And I'll just
Well,
call.
in this, but there's other weighted components within
Right,
that formula.
right. But you've got a low and a medium and a high. The high would be higher than 27,000. Far fewer students, right? The high would be higher. The medium would probably be a little bit higher than the 27. And the low would probably be less than the 27 if you're actually looking at actual costs. On a per pupil basis for the students that are identified statewide in each of these three categories.
I'm listening to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm agreeing with your approach,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
I think we need to get some actual costs from the department.
Yeah,
I don't believe we're going to have those actual costs by February 15th.
I agree.
So then we're going to have to, because that is a component within several of the bills.
Yeah.
So, you know, Representative Ames.
I just want to say that I absolutely agree with doing this, getting those costs, the 27,000 broken out into these three categories. And I think the implication for this bill is that if we think there's a kernel of validity to it, that it's got to be put off into interim study.
Representative Dry?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. This is kind of a shotgun approach right now, and if we have the ability to target it better, I think we should take advantage of it, and it may take time. I agree.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Representative
just
Stover.
want to speak on a very conceptual level, because I have no idea how the $27,000 was derived, let alone how it would break out into three categories if it was recalculated. But averages are very dangerous, especially if you have a broad dispersion. And the Fredette chart reveals very evidently what we pretty much already know. And that is that when you break out into these three categories, there is no convergence in the student count. It's 22,000 plus in one category, 2,000, nearly 4,000 in the others. So to try and average things that are so widely disparate is a bad idea to begin with. And then the other variable, which is the average cost of these categories, has the same problem. So mathematically, you compound the problem. If you come to a single average that is derived from two variables that each are actually very disparate across the data set, which is to say, I think the more you break it out, the more you differentiate, the better. And so I think the three category approach is a good one.
Yes.
Where we go in terms of getting the numbers is,
Well, Representative, we're going to have to get it from DOE, and they're going to have to get it out of the districts.
Yeah.
But we do have trends for special education in terms of the specific IEPs going way back. When I first arrived, that information was available. You were a deputy commissioner at that time, or a little bit earlier than that. But the trends are there, and the number of students, for example, in that last category, the more expensive category, has been roughly in the same ballpark, 600, 700 students. And then the total number of IEPs has not really changed significantly. It's grown as we have our demographic going down. Special ed IEP population is increasing. And, but that is just my quick look.
well,
But
and
I'm also seeing right
since
here
the
that
data
we're
is
talking
available,
20
that's all the more reason to
Yeah.
go into breaking out the categories.
And here they're using 28,626 students for this. It's been higher than that. And it's been up to 31,000. So we got to be consistent. And so there's going to have to be some averages built in somewhere. But averaging it by these categories, I think is much more efficient and effective. Representative Heath?
In my mind. I know that the School Fair Funding has done an analysis of special ed. I don't know if it's okay to ask Zach if he has any contributions to this conversation.
Well, if there are any spreadsheets or any information that people can give us, I'd be very interested in receiving that. However, if they have something, they're willing to put their hand up and we'll, find out. I think what we will try to do is work with the department, and they oftentimes work with other groups as well in gathering this information. They do.
Okay.
So, yes.
It seems to me, if this information is available, then you could build an algorithm as part of the bill and have the algorithm in the bill, but not the dollars. And so if the information can be had over time and there's something comes out the other side based on the algorithm, I think even though I can't vote, I think we're agreeing it's better to have these three categories.
Yes.
I
Representative Cascade.
agree, I would agree with that. And I think if we broke out the categories and decided what they were, because the goal is least restrictive environment, as you see in the data sheet, right? The federal indicators are already identified of 80%, 40%,
Yeah.
and the last one. So at least you start with those three, because you can tie it to the indicators on IDEA. And then, like Representative just said, don't have a dollar amount because it's going to vary so much. And then plug into a formula each individual district cost, right?
You can see on the Education Commission Education Commission of the states there, that the information I
Yeah.
gave you there,
Yep.
there's several states which have multiple categories for funding IEPs. I would think that to get that information would be very difficult. To try to break it down that microscopic may be very difficult, given the nature of the support we have at DOE and the support that many of these small school districts have, which they don't have in a lot of these towns. So this sheet rate, using these categorical numbers, categories that we know we have to respond to, these are being done. And I think that it would expedite our whole process. And I think we would achieve if we could have these three type of categories. We tried it the other way, and I had numerous special ed directors contacting me saying, this IEP and this IEP, they're meshing together, kids that have both categories, and you see this movement on, you have students that are orthopedically handicapped or physically handicapped, but also have a disability, or you know, maybe a traumatic brain injury. And so I think we better stick with what the feds are asking us for. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would, I just want to tag on to what Representative Ames was suggesting, that we look at interim study for 1656 so that we can work on identifying. I think Representative Dry suggested this too, that this is going to take some time to you know, understand and put some numbers behind this. I was also wondering if, and I know it may be outside of the specific scope of this subcommittee, but if the subcommittee could also make an advisory opinion on Representative Heath's bill to actually study the work, because I think supporting an interim study on this and supporting an OTP to actually studying it are very consistent.
Any comments on that? Has everybody had an opportunity to read that bill that you have? There's one angle in there you're also reflecting on, that we have to raise more money. And that equates to me property taxes or income tax or sales tax. That's not the intent. I can say right now, out of the gate, I will not support income tax or sales tax. And I that was in my report, minority report that I put into the commission study. I think that's just going to be a war on the House floor. Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with your comments,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, and firmly believe if we're going to do anything to try to address school funding, that we make addressing school funding the goal, and not precede it with a tax debate. And if we can do so in a way that provides equity for students and taxpayers, without requiring getting into a tax debate, then I think we will have made a huge progress on this goal.
The purpose of this committee, we're dealing with policy, but we also have ways, and we have finance here with us. And I think it's important that we come forth with the policy, get that affirmed or supported, and then we figure out, okay, Representative Ames, okay, Representative Tracy here, figure it out, cost-wise. Okay, but we can't divorce that topic, though. We can't divorce it. That's why we have people here right now with us on this committee. So everything is sort of melded together, but we got to get our policy squared away first. Okay, so I think that would take us through that particular bill. Is the committee supportive of interim study, and also pending support we get from that commission study, as long as that committee study of yours, Representative Heath, as long as we don't get wrapped up in income tax and sales tax? Okay, good. Yes.
Chair, for the same reasons, I would also suggest an interim study on 1586, since it also has the differentiated factors for special education and should be brought out into 3 categories. And there's that in addition to numerous other considerations that would need to be addressed in that bill that,
Okay.
thank you.
Is that also agreed upon by the committee here, that we treat 1656 and 1586 in the same manner that we would support an interim study? Yes?
Can you clarify for me, interim study, that just gives a window of time to work out the details, and does it have a time limit, or it's
Well, it gets
open-ended?
us right through the fall of the year.
Okay, I just
Um,
trying to get it.
It's, if there are these areas where we want actual costs, if we want an algorithm, then I think we need that time to do it properly. But I'm also concerned that we are presenting, we need to get on it, seeing that we're going to be preparing a budget for the next biennium very shortly here. And we need to know if we're going to categorize something in differentiated aid, whatever the cost might be, we'd have to figure that out. But we need, I strongly feel that we need to categorize that differentiated aid area. Is there any objection from committee members on that point, that we need to categorize special ed?
I agree.
Yeah, I think everybody's in concurrence on that. Okay, good. Representative Heath, did you have your hand up or something? No, okay, good. Oh, okay, Representative Dry.
To take good notes, are we talking about already interim studying 1586?
Yes, we were doing both.
Okay, and my comment on that would be, is that just to study the part with the funding for special ed? Because I feel like there are other.
Well, there are
places
other
to
areas, and
discuss.
we're not done yet here, but we have 2 other bills here,
No,
which we need the base cost, and we need to talk SWEP.
Okay, just want to make sure that there are other issues
Yeah,
with
yeah.
1586 that don't get pushed away because we're concentrating on the special
All
ed
we do
part.
is, in this committee, we're making recommendations to the full committee that will be made
I
there.
understand that. Thank you.
And if you go back to our task, which was put forth by the speaker, working with the minority leader, we were recommended changes in areas that, would benefit the children in the state. Okay, let's go on to the next one then, and I want to talk about seeing we got into one component there. Let's trip over to the base cost one. That's 1583. No, excuse me. Yeah, that's it. Yep, that's the base cost. Help me out a little bit here. The base cost we know is $4,100 right now. And that's based upon inputs, right? Is it understood that this $10 million is also going to be based upon input? Or is this aligned with the other foundational formula?
Mr. Chair, you're talking about 1583,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Yeah, my understanding is 1583 makes no other changes with respect to looking at outcomes or accountability or anything, that it would rely based on the current framework for
Okay, okay.
input-based framework.
So then let's look at this sheet right here. Because this is doing exactly that. This is a sheet that was developed originally back in 2008 through Senator Estabrook's study when we had the costing for an adequate education. We also developed what the opportunity for an adequate education is. And that was the year I came into the legislature, so I was really oblivious to what was going on. I was just like a freshman in high school and a freshman in college. But the price back then was set at a much lower figure than we have right here. And it was based upon all these inputs that you see on the left-hand side, teachers, principal, administrative assistant, guidance counselor, library media specialist, then it goes to the reverse side, technology coordinator, and custodian, and then those other components which are not instructional materials, technology, teacher professional development, facilities operation and maintenance, transportation, and came out with a total cost for K through 2, and came out with a total cost for grades 3 through 12. And then we came up with a universal cost. If it K through 2, there's three grade levels there we're talking about. That was multiplied times that basic total cost for K through 2. And then they did the same thing for 3 through 12. They took that base cost of what it was and multiplied that by the remaining 10, because it'd be grades 3 through 12. There's 10 there. And that was divided by 13, because the 13 grade levels that we have, K through 12. And we came out with the universal cost for base education. So what this does, I asked the research upstairs to find out what is the cost today for a first-year teacher. Is that correct, Jennifer? You did it.
Yes.
Yeah.
The DOE has information on the minimum first-year teacher by district. And I think that's.
Okay, and you see that memo that was handed out.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
the question I have though is that it says that costing is based on a 208, 217. So are you saying that the cost on this particular sheet is the most recent cost? It's not based upon, it's not on,
This is the, if you look at this sheet right here, the teacher minimum salary, state average minimum salary is $42,560. That's the price, the cost of which we're using right here in this formula. You look at the top line, it says 42,560 on this sheet. That sheet. Okay? So we are using the current information from DOE here. And then there's a benefits package, which 33% was taken in account. You had the total cost, which came out to 56,605. I did reduce that from 1 to 25 to 1 to 20. So that increased the cost of your bottom figure. But in looking at the average per pupil teacher ratio, it's much lower than 20 to 1. I would say closer to 14 or so there in that ballpark. Those decisions are oftentimes made by the local school district. And looking at that, I've met with some superintendents say that you have to have a teacher and they have to have a para in every classroom. I was commenting earlier this morning that when I was a principal and later administrator, wonderful school over in Rumford, Maine, West Peru, where I had 2 nuns, one in kindergarten, one in first grade. I could put 28 kids in that classroom and they would all come out learning how to basically spell and read and everything else. They were really on top of it. So these are local decisions. And so when they drop it that low, that's a local decision based upon the characteristics of a community, whether it's a poverty, they may not have the money, or maybe they have some situations where they need that type of ratio. The state has to come up with some kind of, on an input basis, what we figure is the average input cost. And so using that salary, that's how we came up with it. I did reduce it to 1 to 20, seeing that's more in common, that's going in the direction that it's still above the average for the state, but it's going in the direction. And dropping the high school also down to 1 to 30, 1 to 25, you can see grades 3 through 12, down to 1 to 25. We know that in high school, because of block scheduling and all that, there's some classes they can load up a little bit more than other classes, and it should balance out. So my concern is that, are we looking to try to recommend something that is an increase? Or are we staying with what we currently have on the books of $4,100 per kid. This would jump it by to 4,852, and just some real quick calculations, that's over $100 million. If you add in the special education also, it comes up close to 115 million. So there's a jump there. It's open for discussion. I don't want to hog it. Yes, Representative Ames.
As I think we all know, this costing question was the subject of a trial. And in that trial, several experts, the superintendent at Conval was one of the principal ones, walked through all these different input costs. So it was an input-based query that occurred in the trial, and out of that, all of which is documented in the court's decision, came a 7,000 something number, $7,356 per pupil number, which is higher than this. I can only talk generally about this, but that analysis is a different analysis than the one that was worked through, what was it, 2008, I think. And it basically found that it's more costly to run schools than is shown in that data. I think we have to deal with that, not just work back and try to work over and update the analysis that was done 12 years ago, whatever it was.
Now, remember there was a sheet passed out at the last meeting, and if we took all the state appropriation dollars which are going to these districts, the current law adequacy on average in the state is $6,825 per pupil. That's what it is. Now, that's pretty close to that court case. Representative Myler.
Yeah, I think to tag on to Representative Ames's comment, I think it's important because from what I understand, in the court case, the state had no justification for the current 4,100. They made no apparent appeal on why that figure is good. The defendants, the state, basically try to nitpick what the input model that was coming forth from Conval. And so I think as we begin to look at the 4,100, moving it to 5,100 to 6,000, there's got to be a better basis, which what I think the court was saying is that there's basis for the need to increase that figure. And that the current process of what we're doing is really what they were ruling against as it relates to where we are right now in the funding of it.
I don't think they're against input.
I agree with you on that. I'm just saying that the current way that the state is funding has no merit, was not, there was no justification on the part of the state's appeal that the current way we are funding it, 4,100, has any basis whatsoever.
So I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to get into talking about what's happening in the Valinsky case or the Conval case and all that. We're here today to try to address this side right here. And we have not looked at the costing formula that we have on the books derived back in 2008, looked at in 2017, 2018, in conjunction with, are these inputs what we want? Are these inputs what are needed out in the schools? And yes, there are a lot of non-tangible things which are going on in schools that are not going to be controlled by money. And that's, and I mentioned it before, the aspiration of the community, the parent involvement, the leadership in the building, the quality of staff and the staff's teaching and and have the curriculum and instruction aligned with what the state standards are. All those types of things and more come into play. And those are things which vary from district to district, and some district costs are higher and lower than others, yes. And maybe that's due to the property, equalized property valuation, and it may be also a result of these variables, which I just mentioned, and more, there's more variables. So I don't, I think, for example, when I asked a question to the Conval folks, we need 2 adults in every classroom, teacher and a para. That was said. I said, what happens if it's 10 to 1? We need 2. Well, the state's not going to support that. It can't support that. So I think what we need to do is really need to take a look at what is going to be our base. This is what we have. This is current law. And we're dealing with current law right now. If the interim study comes out and goes some other course, fine. But are we going to say, we looked at this as a subcommittee and we think it's fine the way it is, $4,100 does the job? Representative Ames.
I guess what I would say is that I think this is an incredibly complicated inquiry. We all know that. I mean, that's saying nothing. We all know that. But it's incredibly complicated, and to think that we're going to be able to sort it out in this subcommittee with the 2 weeks or so left to our existence is foolish. We just can't do that. So it seems to me that that this points towards what we've already said about what is it, 1586, and interim study. That this question is really a subset of the questions we were talking about, special education and how that might be divvied up in a different way and looked at. And 1586 itself has the whole picture there. Why shouldn't this be part of that instead of dealing with it separately?
I don't want to go with the assumption that 1586 is going to be what we're working towards. We look at it.
I didn't mean to imply that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. We want to, we're looking at that basic charge we had for the committee. This group will have additional discussion to evaluate the successes and shortcomings of the funding formula for kindergarten through grade 12 and propose any changes to improve the funding formula, and they may obtain technical support or input as needed. That was in this charge that came out from the Speaker's office. So while we're looking at this, do we see that there's a need to look at the current formula in terms of how we are coming up with the costing amount for base cost? Representative Cascade.
Thank you. I'm struggling in hopes that we are not veering off the work of the commission, because it's so technical. This work is difficult. And we spent a whole year grasping with trying to summarize everything that we learned in the costing out of an adequate education. And in the end, the recommendations were that we felt transportation should be included. And I don't recall at this point on the school health, the school nurse position, because it's not listed in here, but I don't remember the outcome of that one. But why would we not start with the summary or recommendation of that commission and move it forward in some fashion? Because the outcome was not a specific dollar, because every single district is different in size, different in expense. And if you put in certain, factors, right? We had that conversation. Why aren't we moving from that to move the needle versus, and can AIR develop that algorithm that Representative Aaron was kind of playing around with? I mean,
If
it-
this committee feels that that's the direction, you're talking to Rick Ladd,
I am.
and Rick Ladd was the one who voted against the commission report.
But you said it was because
There's
of the
good things
special
within
ed.
it. There are good things within it.
Right, right.
But I do not comprehend or understand how you came up with that the figure you're deciding, this is what we got to fund education at to maintain or get to that achievement level we want these kids at. What are the inputs for that end item, and where did you get this end item based upon what? The DOE 25 form?
Didn't we identify that in the commission? one?
Transportation's taken out of that. But that DOE
Yeah.
25 form has all your expenses.
Yes,
All
it
of your
does.
expenses.
Yeah, I have
Are
the
all those
checklist.
expenses adequacy?
Right.
I don't know. I don't
Oh.
think they are. Representative Luna.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and that's one of the things that I'd suggest we take a look at in interim study on that, because I do agree with you that I think, I mean, obviously, I really feel an outcome-driven definition is strong, but I think also having a hard deck, establishing a hard deck as far as the core components of an adequate education as they exist right now in 193E2A, having those things listed, I think makes a lot of sense too. So I'd like to push that to an interim study thing. But going back to the bill we're on right now, 1583, right?
Yeah.
1583. I guess I still don't understand where Conval differs from this, the modified 2017 chart where you've updated the salary, the benefits, and the teacher to student ratios. And I was wondering if maybe Mr. Sheehan might be able to talk to us about what the court's actual.
Well, we have this sheet, which was provided to us by our research upstairs.
Mhm.
If you dig down in it, you can see the teacher minimum salary in public school districts,
Yeah.
2023-24.
42,560.
You can look exactly and find out what Conval's minimum salary is, where they're starting.
And where are they?
Well, you have to look down through here.
This has Conval? Oh, you mean what the Conval district?
Yeah.
Oh, I was more interested in what the Conval court.
Oh, okay. I thought you were
and-
talking about the.
No,
district.
no. And I mean, just to understand it, because Representative Ames, Representative Myler talked about how the court developed its 7356 uniform cost. And I was wondering if Mr. Sheehan might be able to.
But I'm not interested in the court.
No,
I'm
I
interested
just-
in the legislature doing this.
I'm just trying to understand what
Yeah.
the court did.
With all due respect,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I think we are trying to make informed decisions, and everything that we need, I think the court essentially is part of the work that we need to do, and we need to be as informed as much as we can. So I kind of agree with Representative Luno, and I would like to hear from Zach in terms of our thinking, in terms of what the base should be. We grappled with it in Division 2, Representative, didn't we? And
Or grappling. I think it's an
grappling, absolutely. And there were a lot of factors that we had to consider, and that bottom line always kept coming up. But I think what happened in the courts has to influence. They're expecting the legislature to respond somehow. So I would vote, if I could, to hear what Mr. Sheehan has to say. if
We've had
possible.
input from various groups the last several meetings we've had. I think it's time for us to, if we've all discussed the idea of interim study and looking through the bill that you have, Representative Heath.
Yeah.
I think it's time for this committee to decide you know, some of these issues without saying, well, we're gonna need another darn committee. The last commission study we had was a $500,000 commission. And we came out and we have flaws in the report, or misunderstandings, or people that I don't understand all of it in terms of where they came up with that goal, the performance outcome. And based upon what? What criteria? We are tasked by the statute or by the courts to identify, regardless of poverty or wealth of a district, to provide an adequate education fairly to all kids, and that means costing it out. And it has to be done, I believe, by inputs. And I think this is where we're coming down to it, that there's some that believe this performance outcome side without, and I think it's going to end up, you're going to have to deal with the inputs there too. But there's another side in this house that are saying, we like the input method because we feel we're meeting the requirements of the court cases. Now, whether we're costing it is another issue. Well, you've got two hands up, Representative Ames and then Ways and Means.
Ways and Means comes before education, huh? Okay. Well, as I said before, I think interim study is going to be needed. And as I also said, it's a complex inquiry. And so before moving on from that thought, interim study has to be a real interim study, not just a way of deferring action on the bill and then killing it. We need to, this is a good way to look at it. We've got people from finance and Ways and Means and education, and the leaders are the education committee people. It's got a good structure to it, in my opinion. And we need to look at both ways of looking at this as costing this out. The outcome-based model that leads to certain things, and the input-based approach that has led to slightly different numbers or different numbers. We need to go through that, and if in the end the committee assigned that function of studying comes out with a couple of different options, so be it. That's okay. The legislature in the end is going to have to look at this thing. So that would be maybe, in my view, a very good outcome if the committee has two ideas about how to solve this problem. Let's put them on the table, and then the larger group, the legislature, can try to figure that out. You know, by all means, build on the work that's been done in the past. Take into account the court and what it has tried to do in good faith. Both sides have worked in good faith on this, struggling with a very difficult issue that's plagued us, troubled us for 30 years. Let's see what we can do by this approach.
By just that approach, or see, I myself am not interested in getting involved if it's going to be just going in and doing exactly what happened in the last year, where the commission report, that's all. We were looking at one model. We had decided this is the model we're going to do it. There's another model which was done in 2008 and again in 2017-18. So I think if there's going to be something, we ought to be looking at the whole issue of costing an adequate education. And we ought to be open and not just going down one path. Yeah. Okay. Representative Miley.
Thank you. I want to just pick up on what Representative Ames said. It's been 30 years. 30 years since the first Claremont one. Since that time, we've had 4 or 5 cases again. And each time, the Supreme Court has said to this legislature, fix it. And each time, we've walked away from it. We've tinkered with it. We've added a little bit here, a little bit there, but we've never really met the mandate of the court. This court, for the first time, put a marker down. They put a marker down of $7,000 of which he said is a conservative figure. It should probably be more. So it seems to me that we are at a pivotal point in time here, where whether you like the judge's ruling or not, to me is irrelevant, because it's going to go to the Supreme Court. And frankly, the Supreme Court's going to say the same thing: fix it. So I think it's incumbent upon this group and the legislature to finally, after 30 years, to come up with a formula, whether it's input formula, whether it's output formula. You know where I am on that. My concern is equity. We've never really looked at the issue of equity other than a little more money for this district and a little more money for that district that hasn't met the need. So my hope, Mr. Chairman, is that somewhere between now and the end of this legislative session, we will finally begin to take our responsibility to fix this for all the kids in this state.
You want me to react to that? The sheet that I have here, this spreadsheet right here, which was provided to us several weeks ago, current law adequacy aid per pupil in the state, FY 2025, $6,825. We're close. We're close. And so to say fix it, I think that the legislature has the responsibility to cost this education. And I will also agree with you. There's areas which have not been updated that need to be updated. But it doesn't mean that that whole formula, which was established and discussed again later in 17, that it's not able to do the job. We have certainly tinkered with this formula over the years around the edge and taken probably some of the good things out of what we had in 2008 that are no longer there. We took and put a stabilization component in, $150-something million in stabilization to make the formula work. That was not needed in the 2008 model. If you look carefully at it, the hold harmless within that model was around $20-something million total, $27 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. And we had a formula that was there. The Augenblick, same thing. If we had funded it properly, we probably wouldn't even be here today. So you know, I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not trying to say that the whole formula is broken. I don't think we've taken the time properly in the interim to reflect upon the changes that are going on in our inflationary society that we're living in, and all that, to make sure that we're meeting some of the wages that a teacher requires to be survivor and have housing, etc. I couldn't do it on $4,100, you know, whatever we're doing in here. Yet there's a lot of local responsibility in here too, where I can look on that sheet where it talks what are the beginning salaries. You can look at Hanover someplace and it's huge. They have the ability to pay for that, whereas others are $40,000 for the starting teacher or even less. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I respectfully disagree with you. I do think the current funding formula is broken. I think courts have said that, but I haven't come to that conclusion because of what the courts are saying. I'll just refer to what you just, you know, sort of held up right here, and I'll pick out a few ones that can sort of jump off easily. The current law adequacy aid per pupil, fiscal year 2025. Right from that sheet, look at Jackson, $13,929 per pupil. Go right before it, Hudson, $4,961 per pupil. So Jackson gets nearly twice the adequacy aid that Hudson gets. Go down to the bottom of that page, towards the bottom, Newcastle, $41,901 per pupil in state adequacy aid. Go right above it to Newbury, $10,450 per student adequacy. Go right above that to New Boston. Now we're talking about small towns. $4,700 per student in adequacy aid. If people think that's not broken, that is completely illogical to have a funding system that I mean, talk about spread or disparate spread, which is what Representative Spilsbury was talking about earlier. This shouldn't be anywhere near what we're seeing here. The formula is broken. The Funding Commission concluded that the formula was broken. They said it was broken not just for taxpayers, but for students too. And how can it not be broken for students when the students are being funded by the state at nearly $42,000 per student in Newcastle and in New Durham at $5,100 per student? How could it not be broken in terms of student outcomes? And I know you're not an outcome-based guy, you're an input-based guy, but I think there's room here to look at both. And my background's engineering, Rick, you know that, not education. So I've been involved with probably more, tech companies than I care to talk about. But in all of that experience, we looked at both inputs and outcomes when building products. And I'm not trying to equate students with widgets or anything like that. But you have quality assurance to make sure that what goes into the system is correct, and that's an input-driven thing. And then you have quality control. Does the product perform? Ultimately, that's what happens. I mean, you hopefully when we build cars and aircraft, we look at both of those things. Not saying, well, we put the right parts in, it should work great. You test both. And so
I hear what
think
you're
there's-
saying.
I think there's a lot of room, both on the formula and on the approach.
I'm not just an input person. I think accountability is very, very important, and performance outcome is very important. And I believe our current statutory language references performance and outcomes. If you look at the 2008 formula, and if we had that formula in place today, which had fiscal capacity disparity aid based upon median family incomes and property valuation, if we had a differentiated aid component and free and reduced lunch where that money was allocated out based upon a weighted formula, it had the waterfall effects in it, Representative Heath, and that's not the way to do it. It needs to be a slide.
Yeah.
If we funded in accordance with that formula, where would we be today? Does anybody know? I would bet that we'd be a lot closer to where you want to be if we were to follow what Senator Estabrook and company did. And I know my party back then was in a minority on that, but that's where we are, and I've come to appreciate that formula. I don't think it's something we need to throw away in the trash can and say it has no potential for work. We have chipped away at it. In 2011, we murdered it, and now here we are. So I think that in any look, we need to be open to looking at everything we can to ensure we get the best for this state.
Agree.
Okay.
I think I for one, absolutely agree with what you just said. We need to take a look square on at that original formula in 2008 and see where that takes us. We need to look at this foundation opportunity budget formula too, and we need to come to some judgment as to what's the better way to go.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that, but it's complicated.
Okay, I think we've hammered on this one bill which is the base cost. Let's get to the SWEP bill. It sounds like everything we want to study. But, I'm a little concerned that from a policy perspective in the committee, I don't know if we have, I think there are some changes which we could make. Just recognizing that a 1 to 30, a 1 to 25, this is a recommendation I made back in the 2017-18 study. Representative Milo, you were on that. And I talked about the pupil-teacher ratio and how that needs to be looked at. We haven't looked at it seriously. I think we need to look at that now. And regardless of where we go in the future, we need to reflect that in our costing out an adequate education. So in the policy committee, I'll be really pushing for some change to reflect you know, get closer to where we want to get. Whether that's the way to do it, maybe some study will figure that out. But Representative Mile, your red light's on.
Well, I was going to just say, and I mean, you and I both co-sponsored the bill that created the 2018 study. And my position was what your position was on the commission. I did not support the recommendation out of the 2018.
Yeah.
I thought Representative Umberger did a very good job in bringing forth material which we didn't have a chance to really look at and evaluate. That's why then I introduced the bill for the commission to look at it in 2020, for the very reason that I didn't think that the 2018 had time to look at it. And I think that the 2020 did have a chance to look at it. And there's substance in there to try to bring both components together to try to see how we can deal with not only the fair funding of it, but also I'm going to go back to the issue of where's the equity. I want to, for me, my bias is I want to have the program student-centered, not thing-centered. Because I think we miss the opportunity to look to see how the formula can impact student performance rather than just trying to look at this widget and that widget and this is how much it costs. That's my bias. But I would concur with Representative Ames. I want to look at both of them to see if we can find some way with which we can deal with the concept of the input, but also figure out how perhaps that input model can then be more student focused to make sure that there's equity so that the kids across this state have some sense of equal opportunity. Because we know they don't have equal opportunity right now based upon the structure of the formula that we currently have.
Okay, yeah. We're from policy, and policy has a lot of discussion going on, and what we got to do is we got to move on to the other bill right now.
You want to take a 1583.
Okay, those people are on the subcommittee here. How are you seeing 1583? 1583 is the bill dealing with the base cost of 10 grand. Should that be an interim study, or can this bill be amended to reflect a base cost which would influence those people designing the budget, which would be coming up in another year? So do we want to jumpstart it a little bit? Or, you know, and I'm not saying that's the end product, but do we recognize there are some holes? And do we want to amend something?
But doesn't that one also blend in with the conversation in general with where we might want to go? I mean, to take that in isolation with the other conversation we've had this morning seems to be antithetical to the idea of trying to look at the various options. This clearly is one of them. There's no question about that. But I don't think we're going to have time between now.
This particular bill isn't mentioned at all in the foundation formula.
No.
The $10 million. It's separate. The other one, 27, is a direct result of the 4.29 weighted factor. And the foundation bill is with that. But this right here is kind of like a separate bill talking about base cost. Do we want to, are we satisfied that the base costs then remain at $4,100? Are we satisfied that the pupil teacher ratio remain 1:30 and 1:25? Can we make some simple suggestions through this bill and use as a bill to go forward to address those issues? So Representative Cascade, she had her hand up.
My opinion is that we don't act on this bill by itself, because I feel history is going to repeat itself. We're going to come out with another number. It's not going to be 10, might be 5. Who knows what it's going to be? And we're going to agree to that. And then it's kicking the can down the road again, and we haven't resolved the situation. So can't we include this bill in the interim study? Because we talked about 1586 includes the whole package, and there's a lot of parts to it. But I don't think we should isolate this particular bill.
But there's no inputs like this in the foundation budget or a foundation package, are there? I didn't see that. It was all the outcome.
Right.
So
So
This
maybe
base
this
is
is a
certainly-
compromise in the interim study. Just my thought to move.
are there any other
Forward
thoughts
somewhere.
from the rest of the committee here? You know, Representative Luno?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Notwithstanding inputs and outcomes, and just looking at 1583, when you, and Mr. Chair, you and I certainly worked hard together collaboratively during the budget process in looking at the uniform base cost as well as the differentiated aid factors. And
You
as-
talked about the current budget we're in right now?
the current budget that we're in
Where
right
we
now.
talked about
Current budget we're in right now.
$4,800, $4,300,
Absolutely.
$4,100, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And, you know, the current budget we're in right now has a costing formula that is very much looks like what's in 1586 too. I mean, it's a base cost and then differentiated factors, albeit the numbers are different. But when you just look at turning the dial on the base cost, let's look at Berlin. So I'm looking at that, you know, what you had passed out last week. Looking at Berlin, so turning the dial on the base cost from 4,100 to 9,479, I think is what the department modeled here. Berlin's average student aid goes from $12,000 to $12,289 to $13,876. It doesn't really move that all that
It goes
much.
from what to what?
$12,289 to $13,876. Whereas, and let me just sort of look up to Bedford. Bedford's nearly doubles. So I'm just because our funding formula is so out of whack at this point. When you turn a dial with just one number and you think you're going to do a good job for Claremont and Berlin and Pittsfield and all the towns that are really, and Manchester that are really struggling, when you turn just that one dial of universal, and Rochester, absolutely. It doesn't actually put the state dollars where you think you want them to go, and the department's spreadsheet on this bears that out. So I think that's a good reason for interim study, so that this bill can be looked at along with the others. It's not kicking the can down the road to interim study this, because I think just increasing that number doesn't address the school funding problems that we've got. It's more complicated than that. And it's more complicated than what this bill does. And it's more complicated than what the Conval suit does.
I would like to speak to that point, because in finance, we turned a dial. And, yeah, and what happened was I think, appropriated $150 billion additional for all of the special requirements. Once the crank got turned on that, it didn't move the needle hardly at all, because 80% of those funds went to Nashua, Manchester, and Concord. And nothing to Berlin. I mean, the towns that don't have the tax base didn't benefit. So, and I'm just bringing this out because whatever the formula is, we've never even talked about that in this committee so far. That was a big issue, was we felt, well, you know, our towns are doing fine, those towns aren't, let's put some more money in. It didn't do a thing. So that crank that had the stabilization built into it, I called it the thumb on the scale. The stabilization process seemed to normalize, I'll give it with a small n, the disparities. But that's why you have some towns getting 15,000 a student and others getting 8. But that was the thumb on the scale in the back room. I don't know if you can formalize that. That's I've been upset about that ever since we passed the budget, is how do we fix it? Because we were sitting in this room, we couldn't even understand all of the issues. And it's like, I don't think we're stupid people, but we just couldn't comprehend all of the complexity. So I can tell you, it's moving the dial, Zippo. So there is something else going on.
Mr. Chair? Just in response to what Representative Emmerich was talking about, I absolutely agree that, and I applaud the budget process, the work that was done, and looking at moving several dials as you did. But you're right, it didn't accomplish everything that we thought and that it should accomplish. And I know we're thinking, interim study on 1586, and I absolutely think that makes a lot of sense. But 1586 does move a lot of dials, and my understanding is that Mr. Mangello from the department is going to be here this afternoon with some spreadsheets. Whether we're going to be look. My understanding is that he is.
Oh, he is. I see the head going up and down.
Yeah.
I talked to Mark yesterday.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and so I'm not. I haven't even seen the spreadsheets. I know he's running a bunch of different models.
He
on
doesn't
it,
have them done. He done them last night by 4
yeah,
o'clock.
But what I'm saying is you don't even need to look at the numbers and say, well, this is too much in total or too little in total. I don't even want to argue that, but you can see from looking at that it does a much better job to pushing state dollars where they're needed most. And so, thinking places like Manchester, and even with all the money that the additional dollars that got pushed to Manchester, Chairman Parr was, I think, quoted in, I don't know where I read it over the last week, that we're still, our budget is still $50 million short of just being average per pupil cost, and that's not even factoring in all of the extenuating challenges that the city of Manchester has with regards to their population. So I'm just saying that when looking at the frustration that we have with the current formula and turning the limited dials that we've got there, that there may be better approaches to it. And I know it's a big bill. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of changes that would still need to be considered, as Representative Dry talked about last week as well as this morning. Absolutely agree with that. But as far as a model, you can sort of see how maybe there's something we could do that does a better job than what we
Representative Cascadon.
Just to add to that a little bit, and then I go back to the commission, it was such hard work over an entire year for the representatives that weren't part of that commission. We ended up having research company develop a simulator tool for the very reason that we recognize that different size of districts, different expenses are going to vary all over the state. It's, far from being uniform, and the needs are different. And this particular simulator tool would allow us to take individual New Hampshire districts and plug in all of the variables. And it would, I'm not a math person,
crank it out.
and then it would pull it out. And it seemed like it fit. And so I don't want to throw that whole development out the door to get to where we want to head to. So I just wanted to, let the others know that there was a tool developed for New Hampshire towns and school districts that allowed us to plug it in to see if the final outcome seemed equitable, seemed fair, seemed appropriate for that region, that rural school, that city school, and accounting for those ELL students that are in high numbers in some districts and non-existent in others. So that does exist, if that's something helpful for this committee.
Well, there's two sides to this formula, remember, the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And the right-hand side has the grant money, extraordinary needs grant based upon request property valuation for those students which qualify F&R. Used to have median family income and fiscal capacity disparity aid, which did, I think, contribute to making the formula work. Fiscal capacity disparity aid was taken out. And there be it. And also within how but we had a formula that was, I believe, had the potential for working. And so if we have an interim study, I would hope that that would be part of the, the equation for studying. Yes.
Thank you. And I agree. I think all these are so interrelated that it would be hard to study one without studying all of them. Having been on the outside looking at things from all the way back from the Augenblick formula through all these different changes, it would be very informative and very helpful to me to go back and look at some of these previous formulas and studies. Thank you.
So is it the feeling of a group right here that interim study is probably the best way to go on this one as well, this bill? We haven't talked SWEP. Yep. Okay. So the last bill, which is here, is the SWEP bill. I'll just put my cards on the table right now. I'm not supportive of the excess having to be returned from the particular district that's raising it. I feel that that money ought to be directed specifically to educational tasks within that district, whether it be for their own building aid or catastrophic aid, or ensuring that they can have that Spanish teacher in the classroom. That's excess. And how much are we talking on excess? Is it roughly $30 million? 29 point something, yes. I don't have the exact figure. We get it from Mark. I thought it was a little over, call it $30 million.
27,
I think going after this animal is just going to cost a real fight. And it sounds to me like in terms of trying to get this costing of this budget, it's going to take more than that. Just the changes I suggest this morning by doing the costing here of the adequate education, through that changing it to the 42,560, and with the special ed costs, it comes up to $115 million on top of what we're spending right now. So it's going to be big money in terms of, unless you can figure out some magic trick here to keep it where we are right now, and we don't have to go the property tax or the income tax, sales tax route. Representative Ames, you had it up just a second before Representative Luna.
We're in competition. First, I want to, everyone should know that there are bills at Ways and Means also on this very same subject. And we just had our hearing, when was it? The day before yesterday, on two bills. One is prime sponsored by Representative Fellows, and that one essentially repeals SWEP and inserts ways of leading to a soft landing, to oversimplify what you've done. And then another bill by Representative, can you do it? Bickford. Representative Bickford has a bill. He's the sole sponsor, the prime sponsor. His bill sends the excess to DRA and into the Education Trust Fund. So it leaves SWEP intact, but diverts the excess to the state level. We haven't really discussed those. We just had hearings on them yesterday or the day before. So those are sitting out there. In addition, there's a bill that I filed a couple of years ago that was addressed as a retained bill, came to the floor this year, and was sent to interim study in Ways and Means. And that bill accepts what I believe is the really almost indisputable legal truth that this is a state tax, and sends the excess swept and all other swept revenue all at once to the state level, and then has an augmented free and reduced price lunch program that is funded from the state level or as a rebate program, and also provides a 3% processing fee for localities who collect the money and send it to the state. So those are out there. The latter one is actually in 1586. My bill, essentially the same. I mean, there are technical changes that need to be made. I have prepared an amendment to the other swept bill. There's so many numbers here, it's hard to keep track. To 1686 to substitute my approach for that approach. So I'm not here to argue. I'm not arguing for any one of these approaches. I'm not sure which way to go, to be truthful. But they're all out there. They all are the product of the feeling that we've got a legal problem here with the state tax and what to do with the revenue. I believe that the judge was absolutely right in his conclusion. I know Bill Ardinger strongly agrees with that, who worked with me and the others on various things, including the commission work. And that one way or the other, we've got to do something about this. Is the decision of the Superior Court judge is in appeal, so maybe there's some time to work on it. On the other hand, we're collecting an illegal, potentially unconstitutional tax, and there's some gray area there on what the consequences of collecting an unconstitutional tax are. So that's just background. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but I just wanted you to have all of that.
Yeah, we have two of the sponsors of 1686 sitting at the table here, Representative Spilsbury and Representative Cascadden. You're a sponsor on the bill.
Yeah.
So Representative
I'd like to add a
Spilsbury.
few comments if I
Yeah.
can. So as Representative Ames just indicated, if you include what's embedded in 1586, there are four bills, two each in Education, Ways and Means, carrying three different concepts to achieve more or less the same thing. The most straightforward is the Bickford bill, which simply restores the language that was repealed in 2011 to bring us to the status quo ante, take us back 12 years, 13 years. I'm a co-sponsor of 1686, Representative Marge Smith's bill. I don't know that it's a clean solution. It's just simply that I agree that it needs to be resolved. Whether it gets resolved by, committee action February 15th or goes to interim study, I just think it's an essential thing that has to be resolved regardless of the funding formula, and perhaps ahead of the funding formula. Fundamentally, we've got a situation where a local tax is masquerading as a state tax, and we kind of want it to be both things depending on, where we sit and how we try to justify things. So I completely understand why a property relatively wealthy community would want to retain the so-called excess amount that's been collected from their own taxpayers' property. So I actually sympathize with they ought to be able to keep what they raise locally. When I think of it that way, it just tells me that raising the state's contribution in any portion whatsoever off of property tax is the original sin, and that's what we really need to correct.
We have folks from DRA here on this, and you've written a fiscal note here for us. Is there anything you can add to help us out with this, or understanding the bill, the ramifications, impacts, etc.? Or is it? Come on up.
Keen Meng Wong, Tax Policy Council at the DRA. So the DRA doesn't really take any position on the bill. I think that's kind of expected. What the DRA did was essentially just went through the bill and identified like how it would work, and any kind of technical issues that we saw, and we just flagged that on the fiscal note, and that is. So I wouldn't know if so our comments were mainly just technical in nature. I think the discussion here is very policy based, and I hesitate to wander into that area.
Okay. Are there any questions for the department on the fiscal note? Yes, Representative Leno.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion with regards to the statewide property tax and how it's collected, how it's administered, how some of it is remitted, how some of it's retained, and stuff like that. In part of those discussions, and we had these discussions during the commission work too, there was suggestion that the state, through the Department of Revenue and Administration, should collect that tax directly from every property taxpayer. And I don't actually believe that that's the right. I think it should be collected locally, and because the local tax clerks are the ones that are doing property tax collection, and they're obviously doing it for the counties and remitting it too. But I was wondering if the DRA were to collect the SWEPT from every property taxpayer around the state, what would that mean for the DRA?
Thank you for the question. So that would mean that so we will need to sort of revamp our system, because currently our system is not built to collect that sum of money. So be it the excess SWEPT or be it the entire SWEPT that is being calculated, we would need certain measures in place, such as we need to know whether would the remitting of that money to the DRA, is that going to be done only once a year versus is it being done every time when the property bill goes out, and then is it like twice a year or quarterly or once a year? So we would anticipate the cleaner option would be once a year. So notwithstanding how the municipalities would to bill their send out their property tax bills, how often they send out their property tax bills, and the easier option for the DRA to manage is to receive it only once a year. And then the other consideration is whether would the municipalities be remitting the total amount that's calculated, whether they were successful in collecting the entire amount or not. So that would be considered as we need to think about that. And then let's say if the amount that's remitted is not as what is provided in the warrant, then who goes about in collecting that outstanding amount? And then the other thing would be our technical systems. We probably need to upgrade our systems to be able to monitor each municipality, the amounts that we're expecting to receive from the warrants, and then how much we've been receiving, and then just to keep everything, keep track of everything. That probably about we anticipate probably about I believe the number was about $300,000 just to update that system. Yeah.
Representative Dry?
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. I'd kind of like to change the subject just a little bit. There was some talk in the last few hearings about ways that a negative tax rate could be set that were different from this swept overcharge. Do you remember those? I think it was Mr. Manganello from the DOE that brought that up, but
Yeah, there was discussion on the negative rates during the public hearing of it, but I would like to invite my colleague here, who might be Bruce Knur, who might be able to explain the workings of a negative rate. My understanding is that negative rate is a function of the math that's involved, and it's just a natural occurrence. But maybe Bruce can explain it better.
Yep. You're welcome. You gotta get 2 chairs at the table.
We just grabbed one up. We don't have this big of an audience.
Good morning,
Good
Mr.
morning.
Chairman and committee members. For the record, my name is Bruce Knur. I'm the supervisor of the Municipal Bureau at the Department of Revenue. That bureau is tasked with helping the commissioner calculate the property tax rates. So the team I work with, we are probably some of the most familiar people in the state with negative property tax rates. The representative, I think, was referring to the distinction between how those negative property tax rates arise in conjunction with the state education property tax rate and the debates and discussions and outcome of the one court case. But it is possible, and there have been examples, of a negative property tax rate being calculated and used at the, we'll refer to it as the municipal, think town. I don't know that I can think of an example of a city, so a town. It arises from the same type of situation where non-property tax revenues exceed the appropriation amount that's been voted. And that math just drives us to a negative sum, which is then placed in as the numerator on a fraction that gives us the tax rate. Hence, we end up with a negative tax rate. The math also has its own natural implication, given the fact that when we produce a tax rates, and send it to a municipality, of course, everybody here, if you're a property tax owner, knows your bill is some amount per thousand, but it's made up of 4 rates. So it's pure mathematics at that point that if one of those rates is negative, the entire total is that much less. The implications of that are dealt with, frankly, by the municipality. And each situation creates its own set of ramifications locally. In fact, we are currently watching those ramifications play out with one particular municipality. And there's really no further role for the department at that point. But that is what happens, and it has happened. And I would note, as a historical curiosity, and I looked at this because I'm naturally curious, is that this year we saw 2 municipal rates end up being negative. And they both occurred in when we produce our list of rates every week, it's alphabetical. And I thought, I wonder if this has ever happened before. And I went back to the oldest record that I can access, which is the tax rates of 1975. And I was really quite stunned. The same 2 municipalities. Back then there were only 3 rates, of course. They had negative municipal rates. So 48 years, I think, later, the same phenomenon occurred again. And it probably wasn't the only time in history, but it was just the fact that I looked at the oldest one.
Go ahead.
So, thank you. That just makes me ask if the bill's prohibition on the DRA from setting negative local and county tax rates on real property kind of steps into territory that doesn't have to do with education taxes.
Specifically, I mean, if that bill was law, I believe the Bureau would stop the rate at 0. It would not go negative, and it would apply. I think there was a question, and it may have been in the other hearing, as to whether or not the agency would see the word local as meaning municipal. I can't speak definitively for the agency. I'm sure that the attorney and the commissioner and as well would want to weigh in. It seems for me the most natural initial reading of the law that all the rates would be subject to the same, prohibition. It's not quite clear, but
Representative Cascadden.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my questions. So I'm interpreting now your explanation that the negative tax rate did not only apply to unincorporated locations. There are incorporated
yes,
municipalities.
yes.
There are. Oh, okay. That's a revelation to me. I always thought it was
Yeah.
unincorporated
Sure.
locations
I
that
think
work that negative tax
certainly
rate.
the one court case highlighted the fact, because of the nature of the unincorporated being so small, and in some cases having almost no people involved, hence no pupils to create a school district, an active school district, you see it much more often there. And the nature of that case involved the local school rate and the SWEP. So.
Are there any other questions of the DRA? It's an interesting topic.
Yes, sir, it is.
Really is. It ought to stop at 0. Thank you very much. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break right now. It's right at 12 o'clock. And there's no heat in this room, as you know. We'd have no heat in the building. And there's a pipe broken somewhere. So we're going to take a moment to warm our hands up, have a little lunch, and we'll come back at 1 o'clock. Yep. Thank you very much. Oh. I don't think we need you back here. I think you're off the hook. When you're ready to go ahead, we're kind of limited on time in the afternoon here. Some of us have a 2:00 appointment. And I got a 4:30 doctor's appointment in Lebanon. They checked my blood to make sure the Coumadin, the thinner, is where it's supposed to be. Well, the other day it was like 1.6. Oh, you gotta be about 2.0. And I said, And I said, that's right. Next Friday. Mhm. It's in the calendar.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, yeah. We'll hopefully have a little bit more info back on the categories for special ed. We may have some actual costs. I don't know. We'll find out. Welcome, Mark.
You got,
It's fun.
yeah, Mark Manganello, Department of Education, Bureau of School Finance. So you do have 2 packets in front of you. Hopefully you don't get them mixed around. The first packet is walking through, or both packets. What this is doing is this is 1586, but not as introduced. Representative Luno and I played around with a couple different variables. There's a lot of variables that can be played around in this formula, 1586 as introduced by Representative Luno. So some of the variables that were discussed was changing the universal aid amount. And so I think we talked about this a little bit last week. Plugging in that CONVAL number, the minimum base aid that CONVAL said was 7,000. That's the Superior Court decision, 7,356. So plugging that number in there, that was one change that made. As introduced, it was 6,500. Another change that Representative Luno discussed with me was the minimum contribution amount. Making that not $5, but I believe you'll see it on the second spreadsheet when we get there, but it's going to be $4.25. And we can discuss how that works mechanically through the formula. Another change from what was introduced is the phase in, which we'll talk about. Instead of being 70% and phasing in over 10 years, Representative Luno was interested in potentially pursuing phasing in over 5 years and having an 80% percentage phase in. So basically that was the scenario I ran. You have 2 packets. The money is on the back side. So if you can just be patient with the 2 towns highlighted, Allenstown and Alton, that one has the dollar amounts. But if we can just first walk through the weights, I think we should be able to go through this relatively quickly. But I'll walk through how the weights of the formula works first. So just like any other adequacy spreadsheet, this is by municipality, so you can see the town by town. So at the top there, it's column A. That's just ADMR. And so that is ADMR as we estimate it to be for school year 24. So I plugged in that number. And an ADMR is weighted at 1. So no weight, well, really just a standard weight. It's weighted at 1. So Ackworth has 94 ADMR. So for this formula, we are weighting them at 1. FNR is, for Ackworth, we have 32.24. And we are weighting that at, under this formula, at 1.49. So basically, if you're used to adequacy, we're not adding the dollars in yet. First, we're just tallying up the weights. But 32.24 students weighted at 1.49 turns into 48 students, 48 weights, really. SPED is being weighted at 4.29. I know you've been discussing this.
Can
So
you slow down just a
Yep.
second? Special education, ADM, you have 4.29, got it. You said 48 weights?
sorry, I'm following Ackworth. We're doing Ackworth. Let me slow down.
Okay.
Ackworth, 94 ADMRs weighted at 1 is 94. That's column B. Column C is FNR of Ackworth of 32.24,
Yeah.
weighted at 1.49. That's 48.0 weights.
Okay, I see where you are.
Yep.
I thought you were talking about special ed when you said 48. and I said,
Now,
"Oh,
yeah, now moving on to special ed, 20 SPED students in Ackworth, weighted at 4.29 turns into 85.8 weights. So we keep going through this process. English language learners, there's 0 within Ackworth. There's 1 within Alexandria. So 1 English language learner is weighted at 2.2. So we are now, for Alexandria, they have a weight of 2.2 in their column there, in column H.
So the first part of this formula is working with these kind of weights as we're used to seeing them in regular or at a current law adequacy. So in column I, we're tallying those all up. So for Ackworth, we tally up the 94 weights, the 48 weights, the 85.8 weights, and we get 227.84 weights. And so that's somewhat straightforward, pretty similar to current adequacy as far as tallying up the weights. The weights are different than how we do it in adequacy, but it's somewhat similar. So we're still in the process of figuring out the weights for each municipality. The next one is a little more complicated. It's buckets, I have it described as buckets relative to school district size. So if you are under 200, where you're going to receive a particular weight. If you are between 201 and 600, you're going to receive a weight. If you're between 601 to 1200 in school district size, you're going to receive a weight. And Ackworth, which is part of the Fall Mountain School District, has an ADMR student population between 1201 and 2000. So I'm just coding them as they're going to receive however many students they have in that weight. That's going to be the weight they're categorized. If we go down to Albany, Albany's a very small school district. They have under 200. Actually, they're not part of cooperative, so I can tell you what their ADMR is. It's 68.4 or 68.04. So they have under 200 in their school district of Albany. So they're going to be bucketed as under 200. So first we're bucketing where these school districts are, where they kind of live as far as size is concerned. Where it gets a little unique is if you scroll down to Amherst, which is location code number 17. It's a few lines down. You'll see that 3268. And the uniqueness with that is Amherst is a town that has 2 school districts. So I'm just apportioning out what is Amherst, the K through 8, and then what is Sauhegan, which is the 9 through 12. And so some of Amherst is part of the it's single district, etc., and some of it's a split cooperative. So that was kind of just sort of a uniqueness as far as how that applies. But I'm just bucketing where these school districts are. The next process is adding in the weights. So if we look back at Ackworth, I'm not showing you all the work. There's a lot of math behind this and unhiding of a bunch of columns which show this math, but I'm just trying to present a high level and not bore you with too much math. But Ackworth here, essentially what I did with Ackworth is it's part of Fall Mountain. Fall Mountain under HB 1586, they have basically what you do is you do the negative. So, man, the fractions don't really show up really well in this spreadsheet, but it's negative, I believe, 0.0049 times the ADM of Ackworth. So that's times the 94, with starting off with an intercept of around 1. So basically, we're just adding a very small negative amount, because it's a very small number here, to that 1 ADM starting point. So they're not being really punished that much. They're being kind of they're basically just getting a weight of 1 there. Actually, no, they're basically having their weight disappear. They're getting a weight of 1. That's how I'm seeing that. Oh, no. Yeah, weight of 1 is, sorry. And then I'm going to times it by their students. Now I can understand my own spreadsheet. They're getting 0.96 is what I'm going to times by the Ackworth number of 94. So they're going to get 96% of those 94. That's their weight. And it turns out to be 90.42. So it's a little technical there. There's a lot of sort of calculations happening in the background. Albany is a small school district, so they're going to have a more advantageous weight. Their weight ends up being 1.3, and I do that 1.3 times the 68, and I get 89.41 weights. So we talked a little bit about this last week, where this part of the formula in 1586 mostly benefits small school districts like Albany. So Albany is getting 1.31 weights for each student they have. Moving forward. Yep.
So the places like Amherst that have 2 numbers,
Yes.
how do you
Let's see.
figure that?
Let's see how I did that. I think I apportioned it out, but let me.
You did.
Yep. So 32%. Yeah. So 32% is 32% of those students belong to the single district, and they were credited as the 601 to 1200, and then 68% belong to the cooperative, I believe, and they were credited as the 0.09 weight measurement. So I'd have to get into the details of how I calculated it, but
So did you
I'd have to go into my
multiply
spreadsheet, but I apportioned it out based on,
So like 0.12 times the numbers in that range and then 0.09 and then add those together?
yeah, I took the 30, Amherst has 1,700 or 1,800 students, but 32% of them, so not all 1,800 of them, are going to fall in the 601 bucket. So I take Amherst and split it out, and then I have to combine it back together, but I had to put them in two different buckets.
Because you end up with one number at the end.
Yes.
Okay,
So I split them out for a second and then put them back together.
okay.
So if you tally up the district weights there, you'll see, just staying on Ackworth has 90.42. Statewide, that's 41,000 weights. We have another wave of weighting, and it's based on grade level. So statewide, we have 36,000 6th and 8th graders. So 6th and 8th graders were given a weight of 1.42. So Ackworth has, I don't have the raw data here, but they have under 26, I don't have to do the math, but whatever 1.4 times X equals 26. X is the number of 6th and 8th graders they have. I don't know have that number off the top of my head, but I've added the weights there. I've taken all these 6th and 8th graders within Ackworth, and I've multiplied that number by 1.42, and I got 26. For grades 9 and 12, I did the same process. So Ackworth likely has around 20-ish 9 and 12 graders. And so when I take that number, that raw number, which is probably around 20, and I multiply it by 0.42, I get 11. So that's how we're dealing with the grade level weights. And so at this part of the formula, we're done with the weights. We tally them all up. For Ackworth, the total number of weights ends up being 265.64. So that includes their sort of normal ADMR student counts, which is 94, plus all these different categories that they get add-ons for, like having like being a school district of a particular size, like having grade level students at a particular grade, like having students that are SPED or FNR. And so when we tally that up, we get 265.64. The way this, and Representative Luna can explain this in more detail, but I'll just try to summarize at a high level the concept that he's explained to this committee and other committees before, is essentially he's tallying up all these numbers, and the way it's my understanding is that he's trying to get to a number that equals something approximate to the total state cost of education minus federal revenue. Is that a correct interpretation? So where we end up with these weights and with this metric, if I take the 432,000 weights and I times it by 7,356, and that was a number that was plugged in, and it's based on the Conval decision or number provided. So if I tally up those 432,000 weights and I multiply it by 7,356, I get around 3.2 billion. And so as Representative Luna talks about his intent was for that number to represent approximately the state total share of revenue that goes to school districts minus federal. So we're generally in that ballpark there, give or take, dozens of millions, but it's a large number, 3.2 billion.
Can. The reason it's in that ballpark isn't because it was finger in the wind, maybe we'll get close or something like that. It's because of the work that the commission did in analyzing DOE 25 data from all of the school districts, knowing what that total cost is, knowing how those costs can be attributed to these different differentiated aid factors. So there's no surprise that it comes within the ballpark.
Yep. And that's, yeah. So a lot of these weights and how these weights were determined, Representative Luno can speak to them because they deal with the 2020 commission report, and the report can obviously walk you through them as well.
Excuse me, one more time. Is that number 3.2 billion, is that before the federal money is taken out or after?
After.
Okay, so do you know that number?
Off the top of my head, I know it's in the ballpark. I don't know. I don't have it off the top of my head.
No, the federal number that you subtracted.
It's around 3 point. I think the number for fiscal year 23. I believe it's 3.8 billion, and we have about 400 million in federal revenue. So I think it's around 3.4 billion. So a little bit more than 3.2.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick, every time that ADM is referenced, it's an R, not an A.
Yes.
Thanks.
For this formula, yes. So we have that universal base cost times the weights, and we get that number, which totals up statewide to 3.2 billion. The next column, column W, is there's two things that are applied to that number in 1586. It's one of them is called an efficiency factor. So it's that immediately applies a 95% number to it. So it takes 5% out of it. And then there's something called a transition percentage phase in. And so as Representative Luno and I discussed, he wanted to see what the numbers looked like with that at 80%. As introduced, it's at 70%. So when you take 95% off that 3.2 billion, or sorry, 5% off it, and then you take 20% off it, you get a number that's smaller than 3.2 billion. You get 2.4 billion. And so that transition phase in or transition percentage, as described in the concept of 1586, is going to be 80% one year, and then the next year it's going to grow and then grow and then grow until you have 100%, which would actually only be 95% because of the efficiency factor. But that is how 1586 is constructed, so that you would slowly phase into the full 3.2 billion. So that is the weight side. If everyone is okay, we can move on to the second one, which gets more into the money. So we'll stay in the world of Ackworth for now, just because it's the easy one to at the top of the line. But I did highlight Allenstown and Alton because I kind of wanted to walk through those two scenarios of a school district that's going to receive more money through this bill, and then a school district that's going to not receive money through this bill. So column W is just, that's the last column we just ended on, that 2.4 billion statewide. That is the foundation opportunity budget with the 95% efficiency factor applied and the 80% transition percentage phase in applied. So for Ackworth, this is essentially what their concept of their foundation opportunity budget. The benchmark that Ackworth needs to have a foundation opportunity budget, as defined in the bill, is 1.485 million. So that's the benchmark, similar to the cost of an adequate education. That is the benchmark that needs to be achieved in this bill. But before the state cuts them a check for 1.5 million, it is going to look at what their minimum local contribution is. And so in column X, we have the equalized valuation. That is the property values, including utilities, that's equalized. So we are going to apply a $4.25 per thousand tax rate to that number. So for Ackworth, they have $164 million in property value on an equalized basis. If we apply a $4.25 tax rate to that, or also known as 43.43% of their property or percentage, that raises $697,000. So to achieve their foundation opportunity budget, which is 1.485 million, they're going to do a minimum contribution of 697,000. So that is their minimum contribution. In column Z there, it's a less of the two column that I had in there. So 697 is the lesser of the two. It's less than their foundation opportunity budget. So their state opportunity grant is going to be whatever the difference is between their minimum contribution and the foundation opportunity budget. So they need $787,000 plus their minimum contribution to get them up to the 1.485 million. So their state opportunity grant in 1586 is going to be 787,000. That's the core mechanics of the bill, but there's more that goes on. There's a transition grant.
Yeah, Mark, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so the three columns that Mark just highlighted are probably the most important ones in here. It's column W, which is the foundation opportunity budget, which was all those weight calculations that come up with that. And then the minimum local contribution in Z, which is the first dollars towards that foundation opportunity budget. So rather than state dollars being the first dollars towards the budget, it's local dollars, which are the first dollars to the budget. And then column AA, which is the state opportunity grant, that gets you, using state money, to hit, if you haven't been able to hit your foundation opportunity budget with your local money, then the state comes in, and that's column AA. Thank you.
Thanks for walking through that. So yeah, as we are with column AA, the state opportunity grant, there's also a hold harmless provision, and I'm going to go down one row to Albany, because for Albany, a hold harmless comes into play. And so Albany, the state opportunity grant, is expected to be $468,000 in sort of state cash, a check from the state, because their minimum contribution is $814K and their opportunity budget is $1.3 million. So right now, at this moment in the formula, they're expected to get $468K in funding from the state. But if we look at their fiscal year 25 total education grant, that includes the hold harmless formula that's in current law, but does not include SWEPT. The state cash they received was $521K. And so they are held harmless. And so in order to hold them harmless, the next column over is the 53K. They need $53,000 added to that 468K to bring them up to what they were receiving under current law. And so the way these metrics were applied, the transition grant is actually a pretty small dollar amount. It's around $7 million statewide. So very few communities need that transition grant for the factors added into here. But Albany appears to be one of them. But yeah, most communities are not receiving that transition grant. So moving forward, their new state grant that does not include SWEPT, and we're going to get to SWEPT in a second, it's their opportunity grant and their transition grant. That is going to be $1.2 billion statewide. Where things get a little technical is we need to compare this. If I'm going to compare 1586 to current law, I need to factor in SWEPT. So in 1586, SWEPT, the dollar amount, the amount raised, stays what it is under current law. It's 363, or whatever it takes to get to 363 million. It's 364 million for fiscal year 25. So it's the 364 million right there, except 3% of it is going to retain locally under 1586. So that can go straight from the tax collector, actually stays with the tax collector or stays with the municipality, is my understanding. And 97% of it is going to be remitted to the state. So just to go through Ackworth's total SWEPT is $194,000. They are going to keep $5,800, and then I don't have a calculator in front of me, but the rest of it, approximately $189,000, is going to go remitted to the state. So in order to, and I could have probably been a little bit better with my descriptions here, but column AG is telling you what 1586 does for your community as proposed and as discussed with Representative Luno. For Ackworth, it's $793,000. And the reason why it's higher than that $787,000 that we calculated back in column AD is because I'm adding the amount they get to keep and retain under 1586. And it's $5,000 or $5,800 plus the $787 gets the total amount that Ackworth is essentially keeping. So that's $793,000. That is the AG column for Ackworth. Under current law, they receive $682K, and that includes swept because all of sweepting under current law is retained locally. So they receive every swept dollar they raise. Under 1586, they only receive 13%. So just so you, and I'm going to get into the, Alton is going to help explain the difference between how SWEP's going to work under this new bill, under this proposed bill. 682 is what they received for swept and adequacy grants under current law. And so what the difference is under 1586 and all these metrics put in there, Ackworth would receive additional funding of 110K. So that's how it works for Ackworth. And so I'm going to go through the Allenstown. How are we doing on time? We got 30 minutes. I'm going to go through the Allenstown example and the Alton example, and that's going to help explain a little bit more of how this funding's working. I think Representative Emmerich had a question about where is this money coming from? So this proposal, as in front of you, 201 million is above and beyond what you currently are paying in education. So that would require a funding source that is not, as proposed in here, that would essentially require education trust fund dollars, however you may get them. So, yeah. So in part, under this proposal, 200 million would need to be funded through some source not already identified in the proposal. I'm going to explain how some of the swept dollars is going to help support this bill as proposed, 1586. And I think the example for that is Alton. So Allenstown, and I highlighted Allenstown and Alton, so we're gonna switch between the two. Allenstown is a community that's receiving more money. Alton is a community that is going to receive less money under this proposal. So for Allenstown and Alton, their proposed budget is, their foundation opportunity budget is around, they're pretty similar actually, 8.4 million, and for Alton it's 8.7 million. So that's the benchmark that needs to be hit under 1586. Then we look at their property values. So Allenstown has 531 million as a property tax base. So when you apply the $4.25 tax to that tax base, it brings in $2.2 million. $2.2 million does not take them all the way to the 8.4 million. So if you skip over to column AA, they need a state check of 6.2 million to bring them up to the 8.4 million. So that's how it's going to work for Allenstown in 1586. For Alton, their benchmark, they're kind of the newly defined cost of inadequate education, essentially. The foundation opportunity budget is 8.7 million. Their property values are 3.5 billion. So the $4.25 rate applied to that tax base brings in $15 million almost. So Alton has a minimum contribution that exceeds the foundation opportunity budget. So their minimum contribution essentially is, it only needs to be 8.7 million to hit the foundation opportunity budget. So they don't need to raise as much as the 4.25 number. So their state check is $0 because their minimum contribution covers the foundation opportunity budget. So Alton will receive $0. Allenstown will receive $6.2 million. So that's how that's working. Now I'm going to jump back to that swept column. If you can look at column AA, and you can look at Allenstown and Alton. Under current law, Allenstown swept is $636K, and they retain all of that funding. Under current law, Alton swept is $4.2 million, and they retain all of that funding. But under 1586, what would happen is Allenstown would keep $19,000 of that swept, which is 3%, and Alton would keep $127,000. So essentially, I don't have the math here, but 4.1 million in swept from Alton would be going to the state. So the way that's working out mechanically is under 1586, Alton is receiving 127K in retained SWEPT. But under current law, they keep their entire SWEPT. So the way that's working out is that under current law, 1586 as proposed compared to current law, they are having a decrease in school funding by 4.1 million. So to describe how it's being paid for, 200 million would need to come from a revenue source not identified in 1586, but essentially 97% of SWEPT is going to the state. And so for some of that funding is also coming from a town like Alton, in a sense that they're receiving 4.1 million less in state funding because the SWEPT is remitted to the state. So that's also one of the funding source. That's how SWEPT works as a funding source in 1586, because SWEPT is now going to the state, which means you're not guaranteed all of it. You're only guaranteed the variance between your opportunity budget and your minimum contribution, which for Alton is $0. So that's, and you're guaranteed the 3% SWEPT retain. So I don't know if I did a good job explaining that. It's a little tricky. If we need to go through that again, let me know, or if there's any questions on that.
So Molten Borough sends back $7 million.
Marlboro. Yep. We can, yeah, sorry, this is not a,
So on that, Rick, and if I can just use the Alton one since it's highlighted and right on the.
Molten Borough is outside as Wahanka.
No. Similar type of thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they don't need to be kicking in the whole $4.25 to meet the $4.25 to meet their foundation opportunity budget. And similar to in Alton can probably get to their foundation opportunity budget with about $3. And then, yeah, they're losing the SWEPT, and that's $1.22. So that gets them to about $4.25, which is still less than most towns or cities like Concord or Hopkinton are going to be paying in combination between the $4.25 local contribution, minimum contribution, and the $1.22 state property tax. So the whole idea here, though, is rather than some towns spending $15, $20, $25 per thousand to meet their local school budgets, in the plan here. And obviously, these are a lot of dials that can be turned. $4.25 plus $1.22 essentially constitutes the max property tax for any municipality.
so yeah, if
Wanna
you're
make
looking
sure
at
I
the,
heard that correctly. The maximum would be 5 plus 1.22.
The combination of the local minimum, the $4.25 plus $1.22 would be the most that you have to put towards.
Sure, and the 1.22 is a given, and the 5 is a cap.
Well, it's not a
could
5.
be
It's the
4.25 is a
4.25.
cap. Yeah.
And this is one of the things I think we need to definitely work out in the study is rather than having a fixed dollar amount, have that float based on fiscal policy on what the state share should be. And because when we have such dramatic increases in property valuations as we have over the last 3 years, statewide property valuations went from 220 billion to 340 billion. That all of a sudden a $5 per thousand is way out of whack. So we'd probably most likely float that rate onto what the state obligation would be from a fiscal policy standpoint.
just to clarify, for the $4.25 it's a minimum contribution. So it's how much money, it's your minimum contribution to hit the foundation opportunity budget. Some communities might want to go above and beyond the foundation opportunity budget, and therefore they would have to raise more than $4.20. It depends on the community. Depends on how much state money you receive. But some communities might have to have a tax higher than $4.25 if they want to go above and beyond the foundation opportunity budget, and there's no other revenue source available.
That's entirely based on local decisions. That's not based on
Yep.
state law.
But it's local decisions that for many towns aren't made in the town, they're made in the regional school district.
Subject to the co-op.
Your cooperative would be, cooperatives are different. Yeah, it's all based on how the cooperative would flow through and how it would impact taxes. That's right. Another thing, just to understand, Representative Luna was talking about where to peg the minimum contribution rate, how to get it to float. Probably some more work. The study committee, that's a good suggestion for the study committee to look at. Just so you guys have a little context about some of the variables that Representative Luna and I were discussing was minimum contribution. Whatever you set that to is going to obviously impact this formula greatly. So you could run scenarios. I ran just a couple scenarios for Representative Luna. You could set it at $3. If you set it at $3, that's a lower minimum contribution, which means the state needs to spend more money. You could set it at a higher number. So if you set it at $5, then the state needs to pay less money. So that's one dial you can move around and see, you know, how much money you have or how much money you can spend. That's going to impact the total state spend, and that's going to impact this formula. The other metric that Representative Luna and I were moving around with is the percentage transition phase in. Like I said, it was 70% is introduced, but 80% in this proposal. The higher you make that percentage, the more you phase in, the higher the opportunity budget means, which potentially means the more state money that needs to go out for districts to hit that, or for municipalities to hit that benchmark. So that's one factor that could change the price tag and the distribution here. Those are the two main factors I think we looked at.
I think you're right, Mark, and I think the scenario that Mark has put together here is really, it's not to settle on what the local minimum contribution is or anything like that, but it's really to really sort of illustrate how a different costing and funding structure with similar amounts of state dollars. So I know this is 200 million more than the current state funding, but the other two scenarios that we're taking a look at are 800 million more and then another 600 million more than that. So $1.4 billion more. And you can see what this does for some of the most economically challenged communities around our state, or challenged with different situations in their district, such as Manchester, such as Rochester, such as Claremont and Berlin. And so it's really here to illustrate we could make adjustments to the current model in the tune of $1.4 billion and see that it doesn't do that much for Berlin or Claremont or Manchester, or make adjustments more in the 200 million or maybe even less and see what that does for Berlin, Claremont, and Manchester and others. So, thanks.
Yes, Representative Ames.
I think it's important to keep in mind that this is a spreadsheet that shows getting to 70% of the opportunity budget, not to 100%. And 80%, sorry. It's 80% of what it's going to cost. And cost and then contributions vary. But there's a big difference there, and I think it's going to be important at some point soon to see where we're going to get to at 100%. It's a big difference, and we need to know the good and the bad and hard of all of that.
Are
Yeah.
there any projections that you mentioned 201 million right now, right? What are you projecting 5 years hence?
So 5 years hence it would go up to in column W, it would go from 80% to 100%. And, you know,
It depends on how it depends on the variables. So if you do 80% up to 100% and you assume zero growth in property value, then I don't have to run the numbers to just know it's a lot. So, but if you, it depends on how, it would depend on how you, in theory, if the foundation opportunity phase in grows at the same rate as property values, then the overall net cost to the state would be kind of neutral, because for every dollar you're growing, you're also growing the minimum contribution, and those would wash each other out. Now, it's going to get obviously messy with a spreadsheet town by town, because not every property growth is not uniformly growing everywhere. But generally, if that's generally the average of what would happening, it would wash it out to some extent. But that's all depends on how you design, how you peg the minimum contribution, and then how you phase in the foundation opportunity budget. But you could probably design a model that approximately washes out. I don't know if I can do that, but you could study it and see if you can build that model. I think it's doable if you study it. But you would be assuming you're making assumptions about property growth, which is very hard to do, and I don't like doing that. So.
and I think that's one of the most challenging things about our current formula and this one too is property valuation. And I think Manchester is another good example here, which is a year ago during the budget process, we had expected that Manchester was going to receive, and I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head in terms of the extraordinary needs grant, but because of the increase in property valuations, that grant was reduced significantly. And it was just not something that I think could have been was predicted back at the time the budget work was done.
Are there other questions? Oh, yes, go ahead.
So just quick numbers here. I wrote down the opportunity budget for each of the 5 towns that comprise Fall Mountain School District, and they aggregate 21,210,000. So the combination of the minimum and the state grant, the opportunity budget is 21.21. Our current budget is over 35 million. So this is only 60% of what would be required to maintain current spending. So that extra 40% is effectively what the 5 towns would have to come together and decide whether to further charge the property tax. Right? Back to what we said the other day. The property tax in this formula is bearing 3 layers: the minimum, the swept, and the increment. And it's going to be very high.
Right, and so there's a couple of things on that. We started with 80%, not 100%, so that would obviously get it much closer to current.
Get it from 80 to 95? Did I understand?
Yeah, 80 to 95. 95. Yeah, that's the efficiency reduction, and those things could be modeled along with looking at the local minimum contribution could be modeled up a little bit to try to keep the state share at, I think, what were we aiming at, Dick? 42% fiscal policy for the state share. And but I think, Mark, this hopefully gives us a lot to think about, certainly vis-a-vis some of the other bills that have looked at changes too, and how can state money be used best to move the needle to really be directed towards the communities that need it most. And so I hear what you're saying. I don't think this is not being suggested as a landing place. It's being suggested as a spot to start a discussion.
Well, I think it's extremely interesting. I'm still absorbing a lot. I'm going to go back, look at the equalized value and just make a quick estimate for what I think that would involve to maintain current funding, and I can tell you next Friday. Hopkinton has the honor of having the highest mill rate currently in the state, and Charlestown's number 2. So we are compatriots here. Where everything is so skewed in terms of property valuations. One of the things I'm trying to figure out is where the House bill this spring included fiscal capacity disparity aid, and the ultimate HB2 Senate version didn't. It made a dramatic difference for property poor towns. So I'm going to be looking at 1586 and asking how does that compare to the combination of fiscal capacity disparity aid augmenting adequacy aid, which, because I think that's still an option. We'd have to persuade the Senate to go along, right? But the way that the funding came out of the House this spring, I thought, at least from the perspective of my constituents, was a very good arrangement. I'm not sure yet how this compares to that combination. Definitely better than adequacy aid by itself. But the formula here, it takes a lot into account in terms of, special needs, free and reduced its reading level. It takes a lot into account in terms of school size. It doesn't take a lot into account in terms of adjusting for equalized valuation in property poor communities. So that component, I think, is de-emphasized here. And of course, they're all competing with each other. I get it, but
Yeah, with the exception that I'd say a couple things. I agree with you on the fiscal capacity disparity aid, and that was really, I think, the only way that we could approach that, given our current the funding formula that we've got to work with, because this one uses the local minimum contribution as the first thing. That's essentially a fiscal capacity disparity aid because you're carving into your foundation.
to a degree, right?
To a degree.
Right.
To a degree. But one of the things that you won't find on this, although we've got a little bit of it for the tax transition grants, is there's no hold harmless, there's no stabilization, there's no right-hand side of the formula. The whole idea is that this is a formula that is designed to work. Maybe not with the numbers the way the dials are turned right now, but it's essentially designed to be fair funding for all of our school districts.
Well, when you look at that previous formula, when I keep hearkening back to that 2008 version, we did have fiscal capacity disparity aid built upon those several conditions. And we also had within the differentiated aid, which is a part of adequacy, the built-in F&R allocations, which were even double for her district in terms of double the base. And through that means, I think that formula is able to, I'd like to be able to see how that original formula would look in terms of today.
Yeah, that's worth doing.
And do this comparison. The fiscal capacity disparity aid you talk about is extremely important for those poorer communities. And that's why we worked for 1680 to get that in there. And we did in the House, but we got messed around with on the other side of the wall. And so, yeah.
Well,
I'd like to see.
candor, I voted against HB2 because of the fact that there was no committee of conference and that was dropped down. There may have been some other reasons, but that was the primary one.
So somewhere along the way, would it be a real huge job to put together a spreadsheet dealing with the old formula?
It would take me to some time.
Not the Augenblick. I'm talking about Estabrook.
Yeah, 2008. I'd have to go through Representative Fellow's old spreadsheets, I believe. So I'd have to study.
Hold on a second. This Representative Fellows and I had a little discussion before lunch. She left a whole book over there regarding the old formula somewhere on Pleasant Street.
I haven't studied the, if it's Pleasant Street, we moved it. Hopefully they didn't throw it away. They hopefully got moved to 25 Hall Street. Yeah, it'd be a matter of me studying the old formulas and seeing if I can modernize it. But I mean, I could running a fiscal capacity disparity aid formula as I currently understand it, which was enacted in 2021 for a one-time aid amount. Doesn't seem that challenging unless there's a anomaly or quirkiness to the 2008 formula. I think the major changes is the data sets. There was a 2-year lag on the data, but I mean, I could run analysis on fiscal capacity disparity aid. I could run analysis on. I think the old formula might have had fiscal cliffs. I'm not sure if it
Yes,
did.
it did. And-
Yeah.
And that would, we certainly want to change that.
Yeah.
Those cliffs were horrible when you were dropping down to the next quartile or the next.
And, you know, Mark's got the, you know, we addressed that, and that was your whole pipe. So that's
Well, that
Yep.
was exactly right. We did reference that or do that.
In 2021, state law had the FNR percentage without fiscal cliffs. It had fiscal capacity disparity aid with no fiscal cliffs. So you've enacted those funding vehicles. Whether, I think what your question is whether basically what is the median EVPP of 2008, and did you hit that target in 2021? I mean, I know I was involved in some of that work with the LBA, but basically I think I don't know what the target was or what it looked like in 2008. I don't know if you hit that median EVPP or if you were below or under it and how you distributed aid. But I could do some research into that and see. It could just be a really aggressive fiscal capacity disparity aid. I don't know. I'd have to look at the data.
Yeah, you'd have to look at it because if you fell below the average, there's a lot of little qualifiers to receive that aid in that formula.
Oh, you're right. Okay, so the old formula had if you are, did it use employment security? Is that, or there's some. Yeah.
Well, one that I remember is median loan value.
Median family income.
So
Yeah, and
That-
then you also use property valuation.
So that it would be hard. I'm not familiar with that data. I don't know. Okay, so U.S. Census for the Title I data. No. Okay.
It was done every 10 years. I've got an old sheet at the house. I'll have to look at that with
So-
the instructions.
Okay. Yeah, I've been digging through some old files from 2008, but I could see what the mechanism was. But yeah, I believe that's right. There was if your family income percentage or poverty percentage is X, then these grants aren't applying to you. So that's obviously an easy thing to plug into Excel. The harder part is, does that data still exist? Is it in a modern format that matches how it was used in 2008? And I'm not familiar with it, so I can't really tell you. I'd have to familiarize myself with it.
Well, something we could look at. I think it'd be really great to be able to do some comparison.
Yep, I can look into that.
Thank you. We're right at 3 minutes of, according to that time zone there. Any further discussions or questions of Mark? If not, we want to thank you, Mark, for coming down. This is a lot of work, and we appreciate what you've put the time in. And it's a lot, I'm looking at a lot of confusion in front of me, and I'll have to go through this thing and study it a little bit more. But thank you very much.
Take a few deep breaths.
Keep some breaths, yes. Drink a cup of coffee and do it.
tough stuff for Friday afternoon.
Pardon me?
Tough stuff for Friday afternoon.
Absolutely, Representative. Yes, it is. So we have a meeting scheduled for next Friday. I think it should be in the calendar. I haven't looked at the calendar, it just came out the other night. It's there. Good. For 10 o'clock, same time. Can we use your room again, please?
Absolutely.
And it'll be in this room. Thank you. It's, well, yes, they've got it turned on now. And there was something in it, like air something wrong with it, and it was blocking it.
It had to bleed the pipes.
Yeah, they had to bleed. So if it's like that, put your hand on it and Rob find Derek. Say, hey,